Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 55, recording on Tuesday, February 4th. The Super Bowl is forthcoming. We're not going to talk a lot about it. The Chiefs play the Eagles. You guys know this. Patrick Mahomes, Steve Spagnuolo, Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, and Big Dom. Because how could you not mention Big Dom? This guy's always in the screen. Nobody really knows why. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see him on Super Bowl Sunday. I know he will eat up the attention that he gets on the show. As always, this show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the local area. You can find branches all over the place. The one that I go to, my favorite one, is down on Washington near US Bank Stadium, right next to the Trader Joe's that I shop at frequently at times. So please go check them out. You can walk in there. Christy at the front desk will set you up an account in no time. Great online banking. First Resource Bank. Always appreciate their endorsement of the show. As per usual here early in the week, I go through a Q&A where I field questions on social media. Usually do it on X, formerly known as Twitter. Got about 18 questions. We'll run through some of them, not all of them, but went through them before the show, made some notes, did some preparation. A professional podcast entity, that is what this is. So wanted to give you guys the best that I could here early in the week. We're going to come back late in the week with a guest that I'm really looking forward to. The guy has a lot of experience within this league. You guys might or may, I mean, you're probably familiar with him. Let's just be very clear. So we'll get into some stuff about the offseason with him. I think the perspective will be good and interesting. It's one of those episodes that I'm very much looking forward to because I don't know, you just don't get the chance to talk to people like that on the record, on video, this type of stuff all the time. So please stay locked in to the feeds. If you're watching on YouTube right now, there's like a little red box in the bottom right corner. You hit that subscribe button and that will clue you into all future episodes. We're going to do multiple of these a week, even throughout the off season. I'm going to the combine. I'll be at the owners meetings. We'll do shows from Indianapolis, from West Palm Beach. Looking forward to all of that stuff. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, we appreciate that. You can follow, review, all of that good stuff. Also, keeping the stories coming at The Athletic. So I've had some draft stories. I've had some free agency stories. That stuff is not going to slow down. Reporting some other stuff, some bigger projects. And yeah, check that stuff out at theathletic.com. Let's jump right into questions. If you're not following me on Twitter, I usually early in the week put out the call. It's Alec_Lewis over there, but here we go. Let's just get going. I'm going to run through them step by step. I know my order. I know my responses, and can't wait to jump into it. The first question comes from Cade Delisle. Cade listens a lot. I've seen his name on Twitter often. He asks, what would be a higher priority, offensive guard / running back or interior line, defensive line, cornerback? If you had to pick a side to invest 65% of the offseason assets, which are you choosing? Or what assets make the most sense to allocate? So the answer to that for me is fairly simple. I go offensive guard, running back, because I just think the interior of the offensive line must be, absolutely has to be, and will be the priority for the offseason. Because if you look at and you talk to people who've researched some of this stuff, like offensive performance is stickier year to year than defensive performance. So for me to be able to shore up that position, I mean, it has such an exponential effect. It gives the quarterback more time. If it's a rookie quarterback in the mix, giving him more chance to step up in the pocket, which he displayed even in the preseason game against the Raiders, like that is a beneficial aspect. The interior of the offensive line affects the running game. It makes it easier on the tight ends. It allows you to do different personnel. You can deploy tempo in a different way. You take the bite out of the defensive front, and it helps you pass protect. There's just so many aspects of it. And I also think you asked about allocating assets. Well, I mean, this free agent class is more full from an interior offensive line perspective, especially at guard, than it is on the interior of the defensive line. So that's what I'd say. But I want to shift it. Essentially, I don't want it to be offensive guard running back versus interior of the defensive line cornerback. No, I want it to be interior of the offensive line and interior of the defensive line. Trenches. Like, that's it. I mean, running back is an important position. I think anybody who's followed the game and has watched what teams like the Lions have done and has watched what the Eagles have done this year realize that the shift to running backs' lack of value it probably went too far. And you can see clearly that to maximize a run game in a league that has shifted so far to defending explosive passes down the field, you need not only an offensive line to give you push, but you also need a scheme to put the players in the best position and a running back who can get the extent of the play that's there for them to get. And some guys can. Alexander Madison last year, nothing against him, a great guy, phenomenal, got to know him, enjoyed that, but he couldn't get the maximum amount that was there for him in the run game. And so for me, I also think creating an interior of the defensive line that is formidable. I mean, you could look at what the Eagles have done in the draft allocation that they've spent. I mean, it's Nolan Smith on the edge. It's Jalen Carter on the interior. It's Jordan Davis on the interior. It's Jalix Hunt in the third round on the edge. It has just been it's Milton Williams in the third round on the interior of the defensive line. It's Moro Ajomo in the seventh round on the defensive line. When you have, as much as this game has become so much more of a space game, partially by the rules, partially by the aesthetics of what we want to watch, partially as a byproduct of how dynamic these receivers and skill players have become, and just how the game has trended, it's still football. It's still won with physicality in the trenches. When you need to get 2 yards, you can get 2 yards. The other aspect is, the Eagles' ability to have as formidable of an offensive line as they have gives them a better opportunity on fourth downs to convert in some instances. So to me, on both in the trenches, there is an exponential effect for what that allows you. On the defensive side of the ball, if you can create more pass rush with the interior of the defensive line, the cornerbacks don't have to cover as long. So while, yes, does this team need better corners? Yes. Do they definitely need corners because their 3 starting cornerbacks are going to hit free agency unless an extension can be consummated with Byron Murphy Jr.? Yes, of course. For me, it's just, you said 65%, Cade, but this offseason, and I'm going to get into this a little bit, but it just has to revolve around taking what has been, and I say this respectfully, of a pretty finesse roster, and it has to just be more physical and more like punch you in the mouth. It just a feel, and that's both personality. It just has to trend that way, I think, for this team to have the success that you guys rooting for this, that have watched this organization for as long as you guys have. It just has to move that way. So I appreciate the question, but that's my response. If I'm picking between the two, it's guard running back, because I just think the guard position is the most important. But running back to me takes a back seat at this point to making sure you are fortifying the trenches on both sides. Thanks for the question, Kate. Next question comes from a Twitter member whose name is Pass Rush Diary. I don't think that's a real name. If it is, then you are a football guy. Holy cow. The question is, any guys in this upcoming draft on the interior on either side that you're eyeing? There were a couple questions, but I'll start there. Yes. And I have a story at The Athletic that ran Tuesday with 12 names that I really would watch in the first round of the draft for the Vikings at pick number 24. 7 of those 12 players were on the interior, both offensive line, defensive line. The defensive linemen that I mentioned, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Kenneth Grant from Michigan, Derek Harmon from Oregon, TJ Sanders from South Carolina, and Josh Farmer from Florida State. Now, all of these guys have different body type skill sets. Nolan is a smaller, not small, but definitely smaller type of guy who he is an explosive guy on the interior. If he is available at number 24, that would have to be hard to pass up. Now, beyond the evaluation of what a guy can do on the field, There's everything else. There's the mental, there's the psychological, there's the care, like all that stuff, which I am not as privy to because it's not my job to evaluate each one of these guys. I'm not the draft analyst that Dane Brugler is at The Athletic, but that is Walter Nolan's kind of style. Derek Harmon is bigger, thicker, probably not as twitchy on the interior, but he had, I believe, the highest pressure rate of any interior defensive lineman in college football at Oregon. So he's going to check some boxes. Kenneth Grant is the massive Jordan Davis style, just big interior, can eat gaps in the run game, but he's also relentless. And like I just said, I don't study the character stuff, but you hear certain things about what a guy's capable of and what a guy isn't, both for the locker room and all that stuff. And it sounds like just having talked to some evaluators that he is a phenomenal guy. The TJ Sanders, Josh Farmer, they're kind of a blend of all those other three, but those are the interior defensive linemen that I think are all potential first rounders, and they're all worth the conversation. The interior offensive line guys that stand out for me at this point, and there might be more, but Tyler Booker from Alabama is an interior offensive lineman, very solid in pass protection, and people talk about him like he is kind of a Will Anderson type of guy, in that he is like a tone setter, a leader. So if you were to spend a first round pick on an interior offensive lineman, which doesn't happen all the time, but I mean, would definitely be an interesting approach for this team in terms of how they try to shore up the front. He's like a tone setter guy who comes in the building, and I think would help like pull the culture up with him on that front, and helps kind of establish the tone that they probably want to, that I know, not probably, that they want to establish, I know, moving forward with the interior of the offensive line. The other name that I mentioned in those 12 was a guy, Gray Zabel, from North Dakota State. And Gray Zabel, North Dakota State, it's nearby. I've never been to North Dakota. I don't really like North Dakota, by the way. I mean, North Dakota and South Dakota, never been to either one. Lived with the guy in Kansas City who's from South Dakota. Nice guy. His name's Jared. Good guy. But I mean, that's a different place now. I mean, I moved up from Alabama to Minnesota, and it's different. But I mean, North Dakota, I feel like I got to go just so I have a familiarity in my life and my perspective of the United States. Go there, go ice fishing or something. Like, I don't know if there's anything else in North Dakota that you could possibly do besides go watch North Dakota State football, which I would do. That would be kind of an awesome deal to go like spend a weekend there, or ice fishing. I mean, that's really it. But anyway, I don't know why I'm going on that. I've got North Dakota's thoughts just in general about the state. But Gray Zabel, this guy, interior offensive lineman, one of the most highly rated in college football last year. If you're looking at all the advanced metrics, he's from South Dakota, from Pierre. Shouts to Pierre, South Dakota, and went down to Mobile for the Senior Bowl and was one of the most impressive players there. Just talking to evaluators, observing kind of the feedback from people who were down there. I didn't go as I usually do, but it sounds like he just kind of blew it up down there. So those are the 7 guys that were in my list of 12 from Tuesday. There are a lot of interior defensive linemen in this draft. Like I've said it, but having talked to people who have evaluated this class, the 2 positions that I think people are most high on within the league are running back and interior defensive line. And those are 2 of the 4 priority positions that the Vikings have this offseason. The other 2 would be cornerback, an interior offensive line, obviously. But so I really think I like that. Those are some guys for the person who asked the question, whose name is Pass Rush Diary. That's where I'll go in that regard. Now, another question that they asked me was, will we keep breathing life into broken quarterbacks until we hit, or is JJ the long-term answer? And that is a very easy question. JJ McCarthy is the long-term answer for this organization at the quarterback position. And I actually want to say, because I'm ridiculous, there was a recent night where I was just studying, watching film, doing some stuff to familiarize myself with the draft. And I just, for a little bit, I went back and watched some JJ McCarthy stuff, both film from Michigan last year and then also the preseason game. And I mean, part of me like, I don't want to say I forgot, but it's just so fascinating to go back and rewatch that game against the Raiders in the preseason and to see him anticipate the sideline throw and to see him layer a ball over on the left sideline and to see him climb the pocket and find a guy in the middle, to see him identify shrinking space, hold the ball, bounce around, and scramble. Like, if you go back and and I'm not doing this just because I have to or I'm trying to drum up JJ McCarthy, like it's really just my impressions of going back and rewatching that Raiders game. But if you really go back and watch, yes, a couple of those touchdown throws, those were like layups you can't miss. But some of just the moves he was making and the way he saw the field, like I think that if you're talking, if someone asked me, and this isn't a question, but it's like, Alec, what do you think the biggest differences between Sam Darnold and JJ might be? And I think the answer that I would probably give if you're trying to look at strengths for JJ would just be his cognitive ability, his processing ability, his big field vision, some of that stuff. Like I think that's where there is a notch above that would be easy to dream on and to look forward to. But I just wanted to bring that up because this was before I even got this question. I went back and watched that Raiders tape and I was just like, I kind of forgot that there were some of these throws, some of the creative ability, some of the vision. And that's why the hype was what it was before he got hurt. Like, I mean, again, it's not that hard to, it's not that long ago, but in some ways it kind of feels like it. All right, next question comes from Vikes Verified. Which running back in this draft is the best fit for our zone run scheme, in your opinion? Well, the first part of this answer that I wanted to hit is like really a question. Is the Vikings run game strategy still a zone run scheme? Like Aaron Jones this year per PFF, 162 of his runs were zone scheme runs, 103 were gap scheme. So it was still majority zone. But I mean, this league has trended a lot to vertical, downhill, hit you in the mouth, gap scheme, duo type runs, just like vertical displacement. And then there were a lot of pulling plays that the Vikings ran this past year. So I think first I would ask, like, is the zone, like, is that what this team's bread and butter is? And I think the answer to that is, well, we don't really know. And then my further addendum to this is they should not draft to fit a scheme at this point. It is you draft players and you build the scheme around them. That is what the best coaches in the game do. Now, it's much easier said than done because to know a scheme is to have answers for everything. It's almost like the best way I describe this is like a professor. If you said, well, the best professor, they teach the class that they're assigned. But the reality is, like, to be a good professor, you kind of have to have a knowledge base of the class that you're teaching. You don't just throw out the textbook and create a new textbook every single year. That's impossible. But it's about taking the textbook that you have and kind of massaging it to fit the class that you're teaching, if that makes sense. But that's the analogy that is sensible to me. And so, I mean, I also, like, within this conversation, I want to bring up a couple things that I've just noticed in some of my studies over the last few weeks. I mean, when TJ Hawkinson's on the field, they threw the ball 75% of the time. It's a pretty obvious tell. When Trent Sherfield was on the field this past year, they ran the ball 66% of the time. Pretty obvious tell. Less obvious, but still a tell is when Josh Oliver's on the field, they run it almost 60%. So, I mean, I think, like, and I'm going to talk about some running backs in a second because that was what the question's about. But, I mean, it also has to be, that's why I framed this like it's a collective run game vision, both in terms of creativity, commitment to it, practice time allocated to it, but also looking at the skill players you have to be able to fit what you want to do. I mean, Justin Jefferson, and I talked about this with Dan Casey on the last episode, but Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, those guys are willing blockers, but their body types are never going to, I mean, you're never going to want to use them in the run game all the time. And you can honestly throw TJ Hawkinson in this. Like, TJ Hawkinson is a pass catching tight end. I mean, that's what he is. When he was acquired, I think there was some, I mean, you talk to people and they're like, yeah, he can block. And yeah, he can block. And he's probably not like Evan Ingram of the Jaguars, who is just like, I mean, it's pass catching or nothing. But I mean, if this team wants vertical push from the edge, I mean, that's why they acquired Josh Oliver. If TJ Hockenson was that type of blocker, they wouldn't have probably wanted to go make that acquisition. And so, I mean, for me, this thing has to be looked at holistically. Now, the question was about which running backs in the draft fit the zone run scheme. And I'm kind of just shifting it to the running backs in the draft that I mean, I've watched, I want to say like 14 of these guys on film. And that's like a game of the all, when I say on film, I've got the all 22 tape and I'm running it back and forth. And then I've also talked to people in the industry about what they think about these guys. But like the four guys that I'll talk about here, and there are a lot, like this running back class is stacked, as I said earlier. So there are a lot of guys I could mention, but the four that have stood out to me just watching on tape, Travion Henderson of Ohio State had the highest explosive play rate of any running back in college football. I mean, the guy, every time he touches it, I mean, it is, I mean, it's not Jahmyr Gibbs because that guy's a special. He's just special. But Travion Henderson, he can pass catch. His vision is very good out of the backfield. He has a different gear, and he pass protects. So I don't know if that guy is going to end up being a first round pick. It wouldn't like blow me away. But he's a guy I'll bring up. Slider body, so to lean on him, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, like you kind of need to. I mean, I honestly, though the Vikings only have 4 picks right now, I wouldn't be shocked if they took 2 running backs. That's not said with any intel, but just if you look at the amount of running backs available and the need for it for the Vikings, it just makes sense to me. The other 3 guys, Quinshawn Judkins of Ohio State as well. The fact they had both guys is why they won the national championship. Caleb Johnson from Iowa, who you guys obviously are familiar with, and then Damian Martinez of Miami. So Caleb Johnson is thicker than Travion Henderson. He's more of probably like the bell cow type. That's not to say he's not quick. That's not to say he's not explosive. But it doesn't hit for me on tape like it does watching Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins. That's just what I would say. Judkins, I'm not sure if he's as explosive. He's probably more north-south than Henderson. I don't know if he's the pass catcher that Henderson is, but he's an impressive back, and he was very good at Ole Miss before he got to Ohio State. And then Damian Martinez is picked much later in the draft probably, but he's more of like your thumper, your James Conner. You're probably, if you have him, you're probably building gap scheme stuff where you're just vertical, knock you in the mouth, punch you in the teeth, football. I'm going crazy, but I like his vision a lot and his like patience. So those are 4 guys that I'll mention. But I mean, for me, I just want the conversation less. I just think for us to all be on the same page, and I think for this team to go where it wants to go, and for the run game to go where it wants to go, it can't just be anymore. We sign a blocking tight end. That's not enough. We draft or we sign a better running back. That's not enough. It has to be this collective thing. What pieces do we have? Not just at running back, not just on the offensive line, but on the edge. And then how can we maximize that? Now, I mentioned those percentages earlier of Hawkins and Sherfield and Oliver because the philosophy that Kevin O'Connell came here with is marriage of the run and pass. But the problem is it's very hard to marry the run and pass when the opponent has a very good probability or tell of whether you are about to run or pass. The marriage kind of is non-existent at that point. So that's where I'll go. Next question from Nick Miller, who always listens, and I appreciate his interaction. If you could go back and make any adjustments to your 10-step offseason plan right now, what would you change? Probably a better question for like after the combine. But I would say like the only thing for me thus far is that I in that offseason plan, I suggested trading back a few picks to be able to create more picks because I think this team needs more picks. That's for sure. But I'm not so sure about it because you just got to get a guy at this point. Like I've been through the draft history. I mean, I did this earlier today again. And I'll just lay it out because I wrote this earlier today. 14 of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's 23 picks remain on the roster. That means 9 are not. The only meaningful starters from those 23 are Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, and Will Reichert. Now, we could talk about undrafted free agents, but I'm just going to tell you guys, and I've said this before, the undrafted free agents often are very coach prioritization type of, I mean, that's very, the coaches play a massive role. I've reported a story last year about Ivan Pace Jr., where I spoke to his agent, Roosevelt Barnes, who said to me that Brian Flores being the defensive coordinator was a primary reason that Ivan Pace Jr. became a Minnesota Viking. That's just coming from the agent. That's just the reality. So, again, and I don't want to, like, it's still incumbent upon Kwesi in the front office to agree with the vision, to see the vision, all that stuff. But the reality is, like, the draft, I mean, we've talked about it. It's been written about. It will continue to be, because to sustain success in the NFL, even with a rookie quarterback contract and the salary cap space that allows, you got to draft well. That's just the reality. So if I were to change anything, just because the magnitude that I think hitting in the first round is for this team and probably doing it in the trenches, it's just essential. Next question comes from Tony Schultz. Please educate us as best as you can on the franchise tag versus the transition tag on Sam Darnold, and if one gives us better leverage in a trade scenario. Okay, so this is very jargon, esoteric. I mean, I'm going to lose you probably. But the franchise tag, most people know, and there are two franchise tags, the non-exclusive tag and the exclusive tag. The one that would apply to Sam Darnold is the exclusive tag. What would that mean? Well, he's on the books for $41.3 million unless you can trade him. Now, why would you do this? Well, one of the reasons you would do it, well, the first reason you would do it is because you don't want to commit long-term to Sam, but you want him on the roster. I'm not sure if the Vikings are there knowing that J.J. McCarthy is the long-term answer at quarterback, and he's back not practicing, but healthy, working out, doing what you would expect a guy to do. Now, does he need to put on weight? I'm sure he does. He has like 6 months to do it. I think that's why there's not a grave concern about that being possible. The other aspect about the franchise tag is if you were to franchise tag Sam Darnold, you could still trade him and recoup draft capital for this upcoming draft. As opposed to if you don't tag him and he goes to free agency and then he leaves, then you could maybe be owed a comp pick in the future, but that's no guarantee either. The issue with franchise tagging Sam is this. There is no guarantee after you franchise tag him that you can trade him. Like, now, will the team do due diligence and the agents do due diligence like before that decision? Were like, of course, but there's no guarantee. Let's say a team just toss out a random team. They're like, you know what? If y'all tag Sam, we'll trade a 4th round pick for him, so we make sure we get him and we don't have to do it through free agency. That's great, but then something could happen in the machinations to where you're stuck with that $41.3 million. And I mean that's just it's too much money to be paying Sam Darnold after the season that just happened for this team. So that's the franchise tag. Is it possible? Maybe, because maybe there is another team out there willing to part with draft capital to acquire Sam Darnold and make sure they acquire him instead of him going to free agency and trying to lure him to their team. The transition tag is very different, and it's rare. It doesn't get used a lot. It doesn't get talked about a lot. It's not fun to talk about. It's complicated. It doesn't sell radio. It's not going to get me a sponsorship, but you asked, so I'm delivering. The transition tag is like probably going to be $35.2 million. So franchise tag 41.3, transition tag 35.2. That's more palatable, for sure, more palatable. It still might be a little rich. I mean, it still might be a little rich. But the transition tag allows Sam Darnold, if you were to apply the transition tag to Sam Darnold, you would allow him to negotiate with other teams, and whatever offer that he receives from another team, the Vikings would get the first right of refusal to that offer. So, like, let's say another team offers him 3 years, $100 million. Then the Vikings would get the chance to offer him that. And then if he were to leave, there's no comp in return. So the transition tag, I mean, the benefits are, I mean, again, it's $6 million less. It's bridging that gap a little bit more, but I mean, both are tough. Both I would not rule either out, but both are definitely, and they provide some complications. So hopefully that explains it a little bit. Next question to Dustin Roberts, who's an avid listener. Appreciate him. What are the realistic expectations Vikings fans should have going into the offseason on what Kwesi will do? The best way I know to answer this is that attention will be paid to the trenches, just straight up. This has been I say this again, I said it earlier, but I say it respectfully. It's been a pretty finesse team in a league that is still football that necessitates physicality. And I'm not saying it's soft. I'm not saying none of that. But the reality is, for this team to go where they want to go, and this is having spoken to people inside the building, they have to become more formidable and probably shift more from some of the finesse to being just more knock you in the mouth type of style. That's very football way to describe it. And so that's what I would expect, whether it's interior offensive line, interior defensive line. There is enough resources to shore some of that stuff up. Now, how they specifically do it, I have ideas, I have thoughts, I have, some perspective. But every market is predicated on how other teams, like if let's just say the Chicago Bears, they're interested in Trey Smith, the Chiefs guard, and they're willing to pay him $22 million. Whew, it's a lot of money for a guard. Now, are guards more valuable than ever because of the current state of the NFL? Probably, but that shifts what's possible to sit it's hard to really know. But I think that should be the expectation, because that's the reality, is that the trenches will be a focal point of this upcoming offseason. And I mean, look, they can say that, I can say that. The proof will be in the actions. And it's not just, okay, we drafted offensive linemen, now we're going to run. Like, it's proof from how they practice, from how they reflect on what happened this past year, and how they talk about it, and how critical they are of themselves. Like, all of that stuff matters. And then it's proof into the season. You could talk about signing offensive linemen. You can sign offensive linemen. But what does it look like when the games actually begin? Do you resort to throwing the football? Do you and obviously they're going to throw the football. They have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, for crying out loud. But for me, even though I know that's going to be the priority, and that's what I want you guys to know, and that is going to this is the plan of the offseason. The proof will be in the actions, not in them saying it or me saying it. And we're all going to be watching that. Next question comes from Chris. Chris asked me, was Jordan Addison's struggles in the last two games because of Darnold or a Jordan Addison problem? I don't really know what Chris is going where. I didn't think Jordan Addison was bad in either of those games. Maybe I'm crazy missing on something. He was open in the red zone. Sam Darnold didn't throw the football against the Lions. I think the first third down of the game against the Rams in Arizona, he made like a contested catch, leaping grab at the sticks. That was important. I mean, it didn't end up being important, but it was important at the time. So I don't really know where that's coming from. I think the issues were, it was holding the ball. It was just unpreparedness. On being unprepared. It was, to me, Jordan Addison was not even close to remotely the issue in those games. Next question from Darren. Darren asks, wide receiver 3 option, Kupp or Thielen? I mean, if you're asking me which you would prefer, Cooper Kupp by far, because of his ability to block in the run game. Now, if you're asking me if either of those are going to happen, it'd be tough for me to say. Now, do I know the Vikings love Cooper Kupp? Yes. Kevin O'Connell loves Cooper Kupp. There's immense respect for what he's done. Not just Kevin, but Wes Phillips. I mean, you could go down the line of the Rams staffers who are on this current staff, and they have like the utmost respect for his ability to think both on the field, in the room, all like what he would provide. I mean, you pair, like I have thought about this, and I thought about this at the deadline this past year. Like you pair the mental the processing ability of a Cooper Kupp with Justin Jefferson, the vertical threat of Justin Jefferson with the underneath threat of Cooper Kupp. I mean, it would be unbelievably cool to watch. Now, I mean, it's tough to think about how the Vikings would pull this off unless like the Rams ultimately would get to a place at which they had to cut Cooper Kupp or they would be on the books for more money, which would probably happen at some point in March. And if they were to cut him, then he'd hit the market. So what would he be worth on the market? Could the Vikings get him for a small deal? Like, I mean, there's a lot of options. What I would say is there's a lot of things that would have to happen for it to go down the road of that being possible. I've seen people speculate like trade Jordan as like, what is this? Nico Harrison and the Dallas Mavericks? You're not trading a 24-year-old. Is Jordan Addison even 24? I don't even know. I'm going to find that out for you guys right now. Jordan Addison is 23 and he just turned 23. You're not trading him for let's see. Cooper Kupp is a 31-year-old. You're not trading a 23-year-old who is a vertical threat, which Cooper Kupp, I love him as a player he would be awesome to watch, but you're not trading a vertical threat who can also win underneath, even with some of the off-field stuff that has happened to Jordan Addison. You're not trading that for a guy who's 8 years older. It doesn't make any sense. Now, you could start to get me to listen a little further if we're talking, what about if you trade the last year of Jalen Naylor's rookie deal? And I like Jalen Naylor, and I think he can separate, and I think more opportunity for him. Like, I think to me, he's more, the potential that he could really help another offense is more than what KJ Osborne was in the sense that he is a separator. He is a burner. Now, would I have questions about health? Yes. But like that would probably get me more thinking about him. And the other thing about Cooper Kupp that I think it's important not to forget, I mean, he's played 9 games 3 years ago, 9 games 2 years ago, 12 games this year. He's been hurt. And that effect, now he's already 31. The age curves wouldn't dictate that that's a decision you make. So, I don't know. But to have him as the third receiver where he could block and insert in the run game, I mean, that would be awesome. But it's just, I think we're wading into the fantasy aspect a little bit in talking about it. Next question. This guy's name, he explained how to pronounce his name, and I totally forgot, so I'm going to botch it. But Daers Alad asked, which player do you see going from average solid this year to key player next year in the mold of Byron Murphy this year from last? The two answers I would give you, Theo Jackson, I don't know if he'd be considered average solid this year because he didn't play very much, but like if he were to be thrown in to a meaningful role, I would bet on him. The other one for me would be Jalen Redmond, the interior defensive lineman. I didn't realize with Jalen Redmond, like he was one of the most productive interior pass rushers in college football at Oklahoma from like a pressures per snap. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this guy continues to do. Couple more and then we'll hop out of here. Steve B asks, what are you hearing about our in-house free agencies? I really want to see Byron Murphy back for one. So I think he's saying like for one, not for 1 year, because that wouldn't be possible because he's going to get a multi-year deal. What I would say is this: for Byron Murphy Jr., Cam Bynum, and Harrison Smith, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that any of those guys return. Like and now if I were to rank them, I probably wouldn't go in that order. But like Harrison Smith, do I think he could play another year with Brian Flores back, potentially Durante Jones back as pass game coordinator defensively? Yes, like I do. Cam Bynum, I mean, we'll see. I've said it a lot. There were extension conversations before the season. Those didn't happen, but I know Cam loves it here. He really does. And then, I mean, that safety market, do they want to spend money there with other stuff? Now, there are some interesting safety names, both in free agency and then the draft. And then Byron Murphy is probably the most interesting one. I mean, and this will probably come down to how Brian Flores really feels about paying him versus paying another guy or paying multiple. I mean, Byron Murphy is still 27 years old, I believe. So, I mean, he's still young. He had a 6 interception season. I mean, he's definitely a willing tackler. He can play in the slot. He's versatile. He adds versatility, but he's going to be sought after. So the value for him is going to come at an immense cost. And the question would be, again, like, how are they allocating the money? But I wouldn't rule it out. I would also say his agent, Zeke Sandu, typically squeezes teams when his player reaches free agency. That's what he's done with Odell. It's what he's done with Danielle Hunter. So that's what I'd say. And then the last question, and this is one that got me fired up a little bit. So this came from Grimmy Acorns, whatever that means. How many more times can the Vikings let their fans down before they start to see an impact? It's happening with the Wild franchise as fans have become fatigued with consistent disappointment. And if JJ doesn't work out and Jex becomes disgruntled, could see fans leaving in droves. I mean, listen, man. I just want to remind you that going into this past season, it was supposed to be a season about JJ McCarthy's development. I mean, they were taking on a lot of dead money. The expectation was that this team would win, I mean, at best, 10 games. They won 14. They made the playoffs. They lost. It was terrible. It was the last 2 weeks were absolutely miserable. But no one in their right mind thought they would be there for reasons that obviously showed themselves. They don't have a ton of, the trenches were still a concern. Quarterback was always, the season was always going to rise or fall with the quarterback. And then to go, if JJ doesn't work out, if Jets becomes disgruntled. I mean, how many ifs do you want to introduce in the conversation? Yes, do I understand those of you listening to this have had a tough time rooting for this organization for a long time because you've never gotten the ring that you guys obviously deserve because of the passion that you guys show all the time. Like, yeah, that's frustrating as heck. That's why, I mean, the trench stuff, I want to see it's actions over words. It's making a commitment to it. All that stuff is because that's what you guys deserve. But I think to project, negativity, disappointment, to wonder, oh, if he becomes just grown, like, it's you're getting way too far beyond the reality that which is fair, that if the draft is not better, if the drafts aren't better, it's going to be really hard to sustain. Free agency, to expect them to do what they did last year, that's probably not totally accurate. And then when you draft a young quarterback, as we've seen across the league for as long as I've been doing this and watching it, I mean, it can be a crapshoot, but I think there are reasons to believe in the direction immensely. And so for me, I mean, the woe is me, all of that stuff, I get it. I really, really do. And I mean, you guys have been through this for so many years and had your hopes up and had them fall and all of that. But I mean, this team is this town. And so, I mean, I think the passion, it will fuel, it will fuel holding people to account. And so I just, I don't know. It's a long rambling way of saying those are way too many ifs. I mean, the first question that must be answered, and that is most interesting, is what is JJ McCarthy going to look like when he's starting? And I go back to what I told you and what I saw in the Raiders game. in that preseason game, and it's just a preseason game, and I'm not acting like this is a guarantee of anything, but if you go watch, you see the bones of good quarterback play, and then this coaching staff has he's definitely, at least from a psychological standpoint, gotten the quarterbacks who have been in this building over the last 3 years to feel comfortable, to believe. And so that's where I'll leave it. But that would fire me up a little bit. There's no question about it. That'll do it for episode 55 of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate you listening. As always, the show is presented by First Resource Bank. If you made it this far, like and subscribe. Check out the stories at The Athletic. We will be back later this week with a guest I think you guys will enjoy. Enjoy the early part of your week, and we will talk to you guys very, very soon.